We're getting down to the end game here. We've got 3 electrolytic capacitors. Let me find them. There's one of them. They've kind of got scattered around the. There's the second one. Is that the third one? That doesn't make sense. I thought the third one had the paper tab on it as well. Well, that's the 3 that are over there in the little pile of parts. There is the 22. And there's the 10. So let's see. Let me find the first one here in the bomb. I guess only one of them in his picture had the paper tab on it. So we've got the 100 microfarad at C3. That's this larger guy here. Hopefully you can see on there it says 100 microfarad, 25 volts. Commented on this before. There's this white band here with the negative symbols in it. And it's got the shorter lead. On the silkscreen, try to point it out here with the leg, we've got this black area. That's where the negative lead goes. Black area again. And this one's flipped around, the black area over here. So I want that white band you see there to actually go in towards that black spot on the silkscreen. So he should go in that orientation. You can push him up flush. I'm going to just solder 1 pin for now. We then move on to C4 here, which is the 22 microfarad, which I believe is this guy. 22 microfarad, 25 volt. I don't recommend pulling the leads out when they're in a carrier like this, because they'll bring along glue and bits of paper with them that you don't want to get into the board. So in this case, I'm just going to clip it off. And what I have now is the leads are the same length, so I can't use the lead length as an indication. But I've got the negative. Actually, the negative goes to the left, so let me rotate this around. So I've got the negative to the left, and the 22 goes into C4. So again, I've got that dark black area to the white band directly on the capacitor. Solder 1 leg of him. And that must mean the third cap, the 10 microfarad, which is this guy. Which way is he marked? There it is. You can see the 10 UF, 10 microfarad, 25 volt. In this case, it's got a gold stripe on it with the negative symbol in it. And that's going to go into C5. Let me look at the bomb, and that's correct. So he's going to go in with that gold stripe towards the, or onto the black side of the silkscreen. Way off camera. And now I'm going to apply a bit of pressure with my finger. Just push these down flush. That's not exactly flush. See if I can get it somewhat square on the board. Still not. Not critical that it be square to the board, but it won't hurt. Just looks nicer. So we can see here, before I finish soldering, on the 2 down here, I've got the stripe with the negative symbol off to the left side of the board, which lines up with the silkscreen. And on the third one up here, I've got the white stripe towards the right hand side of the board, and again that lines up with the silkscreen. So let's go ahead and solder up the extra pins on these, which is this guy. Oh, got a dog coming up to join us. That's Anna. I can tell by how her footprints or her feet sound on the floor. She's the one that gets super excited when she comes upstairs and does her little weird doggy dance. She's always so proud of herself when she comes upstairs. Like, I found you, I found you. Again, just kind of using the thumb to keep the leads from shooting off. Yes, my side cutters are magnetized, which is often irritating. So, I'm going to move on to the piezo buzzer next. I've harped on it several times. It's got that plus symbol that I know is showing up in the video. The plus goes over here to the left. On your board, there'll be a plus above the square pad. Oh, I picked up all kinds of little bits of wire on the tape. I'll peel myself off a new piece of tape. Just enough to hold that in place. Solder up one lead. Probably should have wiped that tip off first. Kind of push on him to make sure he's up flush against the board, and he did move. He's now up flush. I just bumped the camera again, apologies. These are very stiff leads, don't shoot yourself with them. For me, powering through this, we're getting down to the bottom line. So we've got the two switches. They only go in one orientation. Yes, Anna, I hear you. Actually, I'm going to go take a little break here. I'm feeling a little bit fatigued. We'll pick up here in the next. So I'm moving on to the switches here, and they just kind of snap in. Pop one of them back out. And what you can see here on the switch is there's these two pins up front that are the pins that are actually switched, and then there's these little kind of bent ones out here, and those are the strain relief. And of course the switch can only go in one direction. Make sure both of the pins have poked through the board, and it's just a matter of soldering it in. So as I always do, I'm just going to solder one pin. I'm going to take a look to make sure they're both flush. Now, I highly recommend soldering in the two strain relief pins, the two bent ones. There's our friend the Flux trying to get in on the party. So it'll take a little more heat to do. But what that does is the mechanical stress of pushing the button ends up transferred to these pins and not to the solder joints for the actual contact in the switch. And it'll just make it more reliable in the long run. I know some people just snap those in and they're happy with it. I prefer to solder them. Like I say, that means the frame of the switch is taking the stress here of me clicking the buttons. The PS2 connector maybe next. Let's see, we've got the VGA. We've got stuff still spread all over here. We're really getting down to the wire. We've got the VGA and the PS2. I had a little bit of trouble getting this PS2 connector in and getting everything to line up. Somebody suggested if you have trouble maybe sliding a credit card in here from this side and kind of pushing those pins. I don't know if you'll have that same issue or not in yours. I'm having it in this. Hopefully you won't have that issue with yours. But just get it lined up and gently into place, and then immediately before you do any soldering, check all the pins to make sure that they are all through. And they are. I highly recommend starting with the center row of pins. Now, because of the kind of weird issue I had, these pins have ended up slightly bent. And I don't know if I can actually straighten those up a bit or not to create more clearance for soldering. I guess I can. Because this row of pins were slightly bent, I'm just going to kind of bend them back to straight to create clearance for soldering. I highly recommend soldering the center row first and then the two outside. And this gets back into that case of if I'd soldered, you know, the outside, the middle, and down, that might have been okay. But I you know, by doing the middle pins first, it'll be easier to solder the outside pins and not create a solder bridge. Anyhow, that's my recommendation. Obviously, do what works best for you. It's going to be a little tricky for me. Again, kind of not having great visualization of the board. I'm going to inspect those. I probably could have used a bit more solder than I put on them. Just a couple of them. So I'm going to touch 3 of them up. Now I want to touch up that 4th one as well. And again, by doing it this way and not having the outside pins soldered up, it greatly reduces the risk of me having a solder bridge. And now these are easy to do from the outside. I think that looks okay. Get things back on camera. Now again, I highly recommend soldering these kind of strain leaf pins that have snapped down through the board from the connector, and that way they're taking the stress of plugging in the VGA cable in and out, and it's not, you know, being transferred to the solder pins. It takes a fair amount of solder to do this and get the hole filled in. There's one of them. I've actually got the tip of the soldering pencil up against the little tabs and touching the the plate through in the PCB. It gets those nice and solid. We've got the PS2 connector. We'll talk about the pins on it. Let's see if I can get an angle here that makes sense. I've got the 6 data pins, and then I've got these 3 pins out here, and these are really strain relief again for the package. You don't want the stress of plugging a cable in and out being transferred to these solder joints and cracking them. And these 3 pins will take up that stress. It will snap down in pretty easily. Again, make sure that all 6 pins have come through and you don't have one folded up underneath, because it sucks to have one pin folded up underneath and discovered after you've soldered the majority of the pins. I'm just going to solder one of those. I'm going to take a look. It looks nice and flush and square. Again, I'm trying to work where I've only got one soldered, already soldered pin around the pin that I'm soldering. Decreases the risk of solder bridges. I need to pop up, check the other camera. And now really those 3 strain relief pins get soldered up. Probably help to do it on camera. And that's all the components except for the right angle connector down here while that's still warm. So something to note, with this car down in the RC 2014 bus, there's not a lot of clearance from this grounded metal top here to the next card. You might want to wrap this in some electrical tape, maybe just a piece of tape around the three sides, which is what I will most likely do. I've got some electrical tape here, just to help keep it, you know, the RC 2014 cards rock back and forth. And this will just help you'll keep a card from rocking into some place you don't want it to. I think that's going to be a little bit wider than I need. I'm just going to eyeball it down. That looks pretty close. I'm just going to wrap it, and I will eyeball this side. Oops, bumped the camera. To about the length I need. Might be kind of fun folding that in with. That wasn't bad. I suggest doing that just as an added level of protection. There was also a suggestion from the people who did the beta assembly. I've got an extra one of these laying around that's already got a bunch of pins removed. About when this is put into place, about not sliding it down flush, but actually having the board kind of slid back further to create a bit more clearance. So now really the last piece becomes getting this guy on. And we need to remove a whole bunch of pins so it can go in. And honestly, the easiest way I found to do this is to simply spin the connector around if I can get it to go here, and I'll show you what I mean. So I've got the second or the inner row of pins through that outer set of holes, but what that does is give me a visual indication of the pins I need to remove. And so I can see here that this pin doesn't have a pin on the inside bus there, and so it's going to need to be removed. You can just gently pull them out. That one needs to be removed. That one needs to be removed. And now we're going to come all the way down here to this one and just gently pull them out. I've seen some other descriptions of how to do this online with counting and that kind of stuff, and it's like, no. I like things to be nice and visual. Oops, grab it down more towards the bend in the pin. And I personally always remove these final two pins here that don't actually connect to anything. Why does it feel like I did that wrong? I think I may have just screwed that up. That should have been, the extra pin should have been off this end. So sorry for not catching that. That is completely my bad. Don't make that same mistake I just made. So what I'm going to do, if I can pick one of these up, is attempt to put a pin back in and correct my mistake. Then we'll look at what I did one more time. Or I may end up getting a whole new pin header and doing this again, because I didn't pay enough attention. So that pin went in. If this had been, I need to get pin 1 in as well. You know, learn from my mistake. There was an honest mistake. I got ahead of myself. Need to get a pin in down here as well. Get it flush with the other ones. Wrong pin. That's got the long. That was meant for the upper row, not the lower row. Having a hard time picking that one up. It does not want to be picked up. Yeah, this is the kind of rework I hate to do, but I did it to myself. Get that pin back in. Looking like it's lined up. And what I should have done was with pin 1 here, when I rotated it around, I should have had the extra pin off this side over here, and I didn't. So this pin needs to get removed. So before you go about doing what I just did, make sure that you're flush down here on pin 1 and the overhang is over here. And then, like I say, I always remove the pins out of the overhang here. But once you've got it right, good look at it, I can simply pull it out, rotate it 180, and just line the pins up. And I'm lining it up incorrectly. I need pin 1 to go where pin 1 goes. And it just pushes down on. And we're there. So, made a mistake, recovered from it. Now, like I was trying to say before, normally that connector would be put on like that, and it was suggested to offset it like this, and that'll make the board set back a little further and provide a little more clearance to that PS2 connector. And that's probably not a bad idea, honestly. So I'm going to do that with this one. I didn't do that with the first one I built. How I'm going to do this, let's get all these pins out of the way. It's going to be kind of hard to get this all straight as well. There's a little bit of the pin showing through. I'm just going to solder the one pin. Sorry for not being better centered on camera. It looks like I'm about there on that pin 1 as well. We'll just tack that in. How square are we? Not as square as I would have liked. So I'm gonna reflow this and just, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, I did that completely off camera. That looks a little more square to me. That side's not as square as I'd like. Oops. That looks better to me. I think we're square enough that we can just go ahead now and solder these. I'm just going to tack 2 of the pins here on the expansion pins to help hold it in place. And we just solder. Oops. seeing the same view you are here through the camera. Those don't look horrid. I'm glad we made that mistake together where I had the connector on the wrong way. You can say pin 1, this side with pin 1, you can see it there on the slow screen is flush to the board. The overhang is over on this end over here. And I started with the connector shifted the wrong way where the overhang was here. And we corrected that, honest mistake. They happen even when you're trying to be careful. I will not need these jumpers on because I will be powering this from the RC2014 bus. See if I can get those off. However, I will need these 4 on. Like I say, this is what connects the transmit and receive for the 2 UARTs on the RC2014 bus to the ESP32 itself. 3, and I'll need 1 more. That then would be configured in the normal mode of operation. For the RC2014, it's driving power off of the RC2014 bus, getting it regulated down for the ESP32. The tape is a precaution. I didn't do this on the first one I assembled. Like I say, it was suggested, and the offset of the connector was suggested by another beta builder. And I thought those were pretty good ideas. I will visually inspect this. I'll do it off video. Touch up any solder joints since I had a hard time honestly seeing every one of these I made. I will make sure all my solder joints are acceptable, and I'll get this guy tested. So I'm going to wrap this up here, and I'll see you in the next video.